Hi, I'm Keith. Welcome to Night Sessions, in which we talk about the philosophies, the mental frameworks, the mindsets, which can help you to get your recordings sound better, better mixes, better productions, get your songs to a more pro level. Today, we're going to talk about getting mixes to translate and some of the worst advice I've heard on this subject and an idea of what you might want to think about instead. I'm Keith from No Label, No Producer, NoLimits.com, Night Sessions. Let's dive right in. So, I like to look at the audio forums, and there are a couple of reasons for that. For one, I like to give back some of the knowledge that I've gained over the years. And secondly, frankly, I learn a lot sometimes. People have different approaches than I have, and sometimes I pick them up and try them, and they're quite good. The other day, I ran across one, which I've run across many, many times in the past. Somebody says, "Hey, my mix doesn't sound good on my phone. What should I do?" And always, there's one or two people that chime in, and they say, "Don't worry about it. Phones don't sound good. Why would you spend time mixing for someone who isn't even taking the time to listen to your music on a good system?" And they might also add, phones aren't going to produce the necessary frequencies in order for you to hear something like a kick drum or a bass guitar, which is down there at 40 or 60 or 80 hertz. And there's an element of truth to this, but it is really a terrible way of thinking. And I would run away from anyone who gives you that kind of advice. And now, why is that? Well, first of all, your job as a mixing engineer is to get your songs to sound as good as they can across a wide range of listening environments. That's your job. Another way of looking at it is it's an important part of your job to get your mix spectrally balanced. And we're going to go into this in depth in just a minute. And if your mix is spectrally balanced, then it's going to sound good in a variety of places. But I think the mistake that people sometimes make when they think about getting their mixes to translate is they want to compare apples to oranges. Now, maybe you have a good set of studio monitors and you're listening to your mix on studio monitors, and then you listen to the same mix on the phone and it doesn't sound as good. Well, that's apples to oranges. What you should be doing is pulling out a reference mix of a similar tempo, perhaps in a similar genre, and listening to that on the phone. Now, I did that the other day, and I got to tell you, it really opened my eyes. I pulled out Sonny Came Home, which is Sean Colvin's 1998, I believe, Grammy for Song of the Year. Incredible song, wonderful performances, incredible arrangement, and mixed by the legendary Bob Clearmountain. And when I listened to it on my phone, I could hear everything, including the low-end instruments like the kick drum and the bass guitar. Now, how is that even possible when a phone speaker wouldn't necessarily go down to as low as what a kick drum might produce? Just as a frame of reference here, the low note, the low E on a standard tuned bass is about 40 hertz, a little bit higher than that. A kick drum might have heft at around 60 hertz. So these are low frequencies, and you need to move a fair amount of air in order to get them to get reproduced across the sound system. And a phone's not going to do that. Well, it all comes back to the idea of spectral balance. Now, no speaker or headphone is perfectly flat, and it's very difficult to reproduce low frequencies from a very small speaker like the one that's in your phone. There is an element of truth to the fact that you're not going to be able to hear the low end like you can on your studio monitors. What you should aim for is for your mix to sound as good or better than the professionally produced mixes in whatever environment you're listening to. So listen to the pro mixes on a phone and listen to your mix on a phone. Do instruments disappear? Are certain instruments suddenly way too loud? Can you hear everything in proportion, especially the vocal? Does the vocal cut through enough for you to follow what's going on? Now, when I pulled in this Bob Clearmountain mix, Well, I got to tell you, honestly, the bass guitar was a touch low for my taste, but it was totally in the ballpark. I could hear it. You could hear the kick drum. Nothing was missing from that mix because it was well spectrally balanced. Now let's go into that just a little more in detail. So a kick drum might have heft around 60 hertz or 50 or 80, but the beater hits the skin of the kick when the drummer hits the pedal, right? The beater hits the skin. And it has a sound up there in the higher frequencies, maybe 2.5K or something like that. Well, if that element is missing from your mix, that frequency isn't going to cut through. If that frequency does cut through, you're going to be able to hear that kick drum on a small speaker, like a phone, or a mono Bluetooth speaker, for instance. This is what EQ initially was. EQ stands for equalization. It's a tone control, right? But the idea is that you equal out the lower elements of the sound and the higher pitched elements of the sound till you can hear everything. And you want to do that with individual instruments, and you want to do that across your mix as a whole. And I think the interesting thing is, one of the interesting things is that if you do that to your individual instruments and then listen to them in the mix and then adjust things so that everything is heard, nothing is getting in the way of anything else, then you're going to have a good sounding mix in your studio monitors, in headphones, in earbuds, on a mono Bluetooth speaker, on a PA system, and on a phone, on a boombox even, in a car, right? So one of the ideas as a mixing engineer, and if you're mixing a song, even if you're not a pro, if you're mixing a song, you are playing the role of a mix engineer. One of your jobs, one of the most important jobs, is to spectrally balance, to tickle the ear and tickle the mind in all the places where it wants to be tickled in the right proportion. Now, that's a kick drum, but what about a sound like a guitar? Well, the low note on a bass guitar, we'll just call it 40 hertz to make the math simple. When you pluck that note, it doesn't only ring out at 40 hertz. It also rings out at multiples of 40 hertz. These are called harmonics, 40 hertz, 80 hertz, 120 hertz, and so on. Now, even though the phone might not reproduce that 40 hertz very well, it should reproduce the 160 and the 200 hertz, shouldn't it? So you should be able to hear that element of the bass guitar. In other words, even if you don't hear the fundamental note, you might be able to hear the upper harmonics. And to a certain extent, your mind knows what a bass guitar sounds like. So it's going to take that upper harmonic information and fill in the rest in your mind. That's the way it works. So that's upper harmonics. And when we're EQing a sound and adding treble, for instance, we're changing the balance between the fundamental and the lower harmonics and the upper harmonics with our EQ. Hopefully to get that sucker to cut through the mix a little better, or if it's too bright, we turn those frequencies down. So we're equalizing so that we can hear all across the spectrum. Maybe you've heard the trick with a bass guitar. Some producers or mix engineers, they divide the guitar up into a couple of frequency bands, and they process the bands differently. They might compress and EQ the low end of the bass in order to get a more consistent and a heftier tone. The high end of the bass, they might add distortion or saturation to. Now, what do distortion and saturation do? Well, they add upper harmonics. This, again, is an attempt to get the bass to cut through the mix in some of those higher frequencies. And why do we do that? We do that partly because we want the mix to translate across speaker systems. Back in the day, we might have 3 sets of speakers in a studio. You would often find this. There might be some big guys that sat in the wall to the right and left of the control room glass, and they were huge. They were largely for checking low end. So you would mix, you'd get your low end where you thought it was happening, you'd put some reference mixes on the big speakers, You put your mix on the big speakers and you'd make sure, because sometimes it would be too weak, other times it would be too strong, or it would be just right, but still sound tubby. The amount of low frequencies was correct, but maybe the low end was emphasized in a little bit the wrong place, and so it might be tubby or mushy or something like that. Then you would home in on those frequencies and listen to them on the big speakers where you could hear them. Then a studio would typically have some mid-sized speakers, often Yamaha NS10s. Nothing particularly remarkable about this set of speakers, but they somehow became the studio standards. And as for me, I would spend most of my time mixing on the NS10s, and it gives you a good idea of what's going on in your mix. Pop it up to the big boys in order to check the low end. Sitting in between the NS10s was often a pair of Auratone speakers. They were little orangish brown cube-shaped things that sounded quite nasally. They had a lot of mid-range, not a lot of high highs, and not a lot of low lows. And you might have heard the saying, the magic is in the mid-range when pertaining to mixing. And to a large extent, that's true. If you have everything balanced in the mid-range and you can hear everything in the mid-range, then pull your mix out into some bigger speakers and see how good it sounds. And this is one of the reasons that I disagree with the advice not to worry about how your mix sounds on a phone. Each listening environment, each set of speakers or earbuds or headphones or a PA system, it is a diagnostic tool. Compare your mix to high quality professional mixes that you know sound good, reference mixes, and go from there. Make adjustments. Your phone is a diagnostic tool. If something is out of whack on your phone, it's probably out of whack on other systems. If you can get your mix to sound good on 3 relatively different types of speaker environments, your mix is probably going to be good across a wide range. So in the old days, it was big speakers in the wall, NS10s, and Auratones. And listening in a car is, of course, often a good idea. These days, a lot of people listen on earbuds, maybe some cheap computer monitor speakers, maybe a laptop speaker or a Bluetooth speaker. So have at least some of those in your arsenal and compare your mix across those devices. Now, let me give you an idea about how this might work mentally. Now, this is just a made-up scenario, okay? So let's suppose that your studio monitors are a little bit light at around 3.5 kilohertz, 3,500 hertz. And you have a mono Bluetooth speaker, which is a little bit heavy at that frequency. So you mix on your studio monitors and you don't check, and you keep brightening everything up because it sounds a little bit dull to you. Then you take it to your Bluetooth and something suddenly starts to take your head off. Maybe the vocal is too sharp or the guitars are too tinny. Well, what you need to do is learn both of these speakers and do a little bit of compromising. So you might turn it down until it's still just a little bit brash on your Bluetooth and have those same frequency areas just to be a little bit light on your studio monitors. And now, if it's in the ballpark on both, you're probably okay in that frequency range on any set of speakers. Now, of course, the idea is to get as flat of a listening environment as you can, and then learn that listening environment. And this is another point. Whatever you're mixing on, listen to a lot of music on that setup so that you begin to know that system, so that when you mix into it, you know what it's supposed to sound like. This is more important than having really a flat situation to mix into. If you know your studio speakers or headphones or whatever you're mixing into, you can get a good mix. Now, there's a couple of caveats here. I'm mixing on a pair of Presonus. What are they, 2.5s or 3.5s? I don't remember. But they're fairly small speakers, and they're not going to get down there in the low end the way they should. And also, I don't have a treated room. I'm mixing in a condominium. So what do? Well, first of all, I learn my speakers, but I can't mix what I don't hear. So I do two things. I pull in a set of headphones that does have a pretty decent low end, and I use that to judge where my low end is compared to my reference mixes. The second thing is I use my eyes. Now, I know people will tell you to use your ears, and sure, you should definitely use your ears. Don't mix without your ears. But a good frequency analyzer, comparing your mix to reference mixes, will tell you if the stuff that you can't hear is perhaps out of balance. So, if you run into somebody that says, don't pay any attention to your phone, if your mix sounds bad on your phone, don't worry about it. I would ignore that advice and instead use your phone as a diagnostic tool. Listen to what bothers you about your mix on the phone. Listen to your reference mix. How does it sound in that area on your phone? Make adjustments. Come back to your studio monitors. Listen on earbuds. Listen in the car if you can. And get your mix to translate across all kinds of speaker systems and headphones. That's your job as a mixing engineer. If you like these talks about the philosophy of audio recording and getting good sound out of your home studio, let me know in the comments and I'll do more of these night sessions. Make sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment. For now, I'm Keith from No Label, No Producer, No Limits.com. See you soon.